Hello, everyone. Welcome to Audubon's I Saw a Bird. My name is David Ringer, and I did see a very special bird today, giant pink bird called a roseate spoonbill, one of my absolute favorites. I am down in Brownsville, Texas, and this bird flew past while I was on the phone with our Vice President for Communications, Lisa Hardaway, and I said, Lisa, there's a spoonbill flying by right now. So we do, here in Texas, of course, it's been a very hard few days. Our hearts go out to all of those who have suffered and continue putting things back together in the wake of the terrible winter weather. Yes, Christine, you have Texas roots. How are you doing?
Hey, David. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Like you said, our hearts go out to everyone, family, friends, and everyone who's in Texas right now. But yeah, I also saw a bird. I saw a black-capped chickadee today. I'm on the East Coast right now, so it's a cool little bird to see in the trees. And the roseate spoonbill is such a cool bird to see, especially when you see that pink just show up in the wild.
Absolutely.
So today we have a really exciting show lined up. For our first segment, we are excited to welcome to the show science communicator, comedian, and social media star Greg Brown from AsapSCIENCE. And then we're going to talk to CBS Radio's Allison Keyes about her Audubon magazine piece on Harriet Tubman's history as an expert naturalist. And then finally, we will dive into some Birding 101 with Keith Russell, who is the program manager for urban conservation. And as always, we'll end with an action you can take to help birds at the end of the show.
Yes. All right. Well, we are beyond delighted to bring on Greg Brown from, as Christine said, AsapSCIENCE. It's a YouTube channel with 9 million subscribers. This is a YouTube channel that I've greatly enjoyed watching over the years. And Greg, welcome to I Saw a Bird.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Hey, Greg.
Wow, flawless.
Nicely done. So Greg, of course, a lot of I Saw a Bird viewers are fans of your YouTube channel, maybe your TikTok. So others may be meeting you for the first time. Just give us all a sense of what your YouTube channel is all about.
Yeah, so we started it. Our main goal was to try and make science as interesting and as accessible to as many people as possible. So when we were in university, we had our degree in science, but we also loved visual art and theater, and we were hanging out with all these queer art kids. And whenever we talk about science, their eyes would glaze over, and we were like, we have to figure out how we get science interesting to everyone. So that kind of was the impetus for starting. And then now it's just, it's just taken off. So we've really shifted. We're talking a lot about the climate crisis. How do we make that something that people can be understand and interested in? And then always trying to just make it accessible to everyone, knowing that science is everywhere and that it's beautiful and that it's artistic and all these things. But a lot of the time we're just using humor and visual animations and ways just to actually make things make sense and asking questions that people want to know the answers to, why do you get drunk, or why do you get stoned, or why does coffee make you wake up? Lots of that.
I'm obsessed.
Yeah, and I love your motto as well, making science make sense. And we already have a viewer named Cindy who says, I love AsapSCIENCE. So we are among fans. And I also grew up obsessed with YouTube, so I'm a little starstruck right now. So here's another question. You've shared before that you came into birding more during the pandemic. Can you tell us about how that happened?
This is so funny. I'm thinking about my friend right now who I've been birding with for the last 7 months, because we just go out with our binoculars and we're like, are we doing it right? Looking for birds. But to be honest, we were just so I'm in Toronto right now. Been in Toronto the whole time. And so I don't know, it's obviously different for everyone. It's very strict here, lots of lockdowns. We're currently in a lockdown. We've been stuck in our house for about 2 months with the only thing you're allowed to do in many ways is go on walks and be in nature. So I think that what has been so beautiful about this pandemic is that it's forced me to more than ever stop and just look around what's around me currently and just sort of take it in. And I live with this manifesto. It's actually from a neurological perspective kind of interesting, but new experiences slow down your perception of time. Like they've found this out for a variety of reasons, which might be why you're in a pandemic and the last year might have gone so fast because every day is the same. And so that birding and these like nature walks and like getting out and trying to like just be present and like find whatever animals are around us was an actual like conscious thing that I was doing to try and slow down time to have like, because every time I go, it's something new. So that was why I started, honestly. And then since that point, we've just become, and saying me and my friend who do it, just so obsessed with it. We just like laugh all the time. We're like, this is just like all we want to do. It's really like amazing thing that I can't even imagine I have like really found in this way and so quickly. But the impetus was honestly a lockdown and being stuck in Toronto and being like, we have these amazing parks near our houses. Like, what's here? What's going on? And it's real, like the birds there are so cool. So I don't know if it's just Toronto or like what's going on, but that's why I'm excited to watch the rest of this live stream with actual experts who understand these things and can maybe tell me more information.
I love it. I mean, so many people that we've heard from over the last almost year now have had similar experiences. And that's actually why we started I Saw a Bird, was people were saying to us at work and in our personal lives, hey, I saw this bird. Has it been here all the time? And often the answer is, yeah, you're paying attention now.
It's so cool. I honestly have so much anxiety, like thinking about my back of my life. I'm like, I didn't look up in the trees, like all the places I've traveled and being like, why the hell did you not look up? Like, it's just like crazy. Not to be in the past, but I'm like, I've, been to these interesting countries. Like I went to Bangladesh like a long time ago and I was like, what was in those jungles? I'm like, damn it.
A lot of good birds.
I know.
Well, what has surprised you most about birds in these 7 months of observation?
So I think that like surprised me most about birds is such an interesting question. I think like just the fact that so I'm picturing High Park is the name of the park near my house, which I just think is like the most beautiful place in the world now. It's so like, it's just like, it means so much to me and it's been there the whole time. I just can't get over how like there's these huge red-tailed hawks, like seeing so many owls. There's just like a sheer abundance of birds that have been in this park that I've always been in and all of a sudden they're just like there. And so I think that's the most surprising thing to me is like kind of what you're saying, just like the beginner birding energy where you're like, they're just up there. Like they're just like these huge, like gorgeous birds. And I think what surprises me most is eventually if you just stop and like listen and see them and sit still, like they're so active. Like we watched a red-tailed hawk like eat a squirrel. Like we could actually see the owls fly if you go like right at dusk. Like there's just so much more activity than I would have expected. I kind of pictured it like a static bird that you like focus and there it is, but really they're moving about and I just love it so much. And yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's so many moments, like once you tune in to the present moment in nature, it's like, it's so hard to shut it off. Like I just keep hearing all these sounds, all these movements, and then I'll be like, oh, what's that? And it's like, oh, it's a plastic bag. So you just like start noticing more and more things once you get into birding, which is cool. Also, I wanted to mention there are multiple viewers that we have who are teachers, and they said that use AsapSCIENCE in their classrooms. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, I was a science teacher. Like I was teaching science when the channel took off. So that makes me so happy because that's my dream, is to be a science teacher. And I still have to say that I kind of am now, but I actually like miss it so much. So that's really cool.
That's awesome. I mean, you are a science teacher.
Yeah, that's what I like to tell myself. But when you're sitting at home just like making a video, you're like, what is this?
So you said that birding has motivated you to act on the climate crisis. So could you talk a little bit about like what that is and like what motivates you?
Yeah, so like I think the climate crisis is obviously like a huge issue. Saying that out loud. The climate crisis is a huge issue. It's like, sure, it's like it is the most defining issue of our time. Yeah, this video is like, so we've been talking about the climate crisis for a long time, but trying to figure, that's Emma Thompson. We went on a Greenpeace boat with her. She's very cool, I can attest. So it's always been something that we have been viscerally aware of and trying to use science communication in order to talk about it, because you'd be surprised how many science communicators ignore this subject. But I think for me, what birding has done is just like made it like so top of mind. I need to learn more, but I constantly meet birders in the park who are just like, who might be like of an older generation who are like, this used to be even more abundant with birds. Like there's just such an obvious like way that we can see the impact of the climate crisis when we look at birds and migration patterns and what we're doing to every animal, like, and the mass extinction that is going to happen if we continue to live the life that we do. But birding is like, I find that I can't help but think about those things while I'm doing it, talk about those things when I leave it with my friend. Like it's made it top of mind for me. So every video that we make now always has sort of like a climate activist moment in it. And in fact, we were going to make our whole channel about climate activism. Then the pandemic hit and we kind of were like, okay, we need to talk about, like, obviously science is really important for this reason. Plus, we didn't know if people were ready to hear about even more sort of like devastating information, although we're wanting to figure out how to make it fun and interesting so people can actually sort of like attain it. Like on our TikTok, we just like dance and then put the information on the screen. So you just like watch us dance and then it's just like a little like dichotomy thing in your brain. But birding has just made me feel really passionate about the things that we need to do, just seeing these like beautiful animals like cope at something that is, all animals make me feel like this, but birds are just a really like amazing way for me in Toronto to like interact with them. There's not that many other animals to have those moments with. So it's just a reminder for me. And actually the book that got me into literally birding kind of was called Vesper Flights. It's a new book.
Helen McDonald.
Yeah, so it was like, that's kind of about the climate crisis. And then now I'm sort of in this weird like British author linking to bird metaphor moment that's happening. There's a book called Wintering. I just finished this book called Real Life that's like by a queer author about science, a Black queer author about being in academia and science. And there's a lot of like bird metaphors. I just feel like there was just like a lot of things that are just like linking climate change, birds, poetry. And then I'm just like, okay, like something's speaking to me.
Well, I mean, it's true. We actually have a long-running campaign at Audubon called Birds Tell Us, because when we pay attention, we just learn so much, certainly about climate, but also about everything else that affects our lives.
Totally. Yeah, there's dark-eyed juncos in our backyard, and like, so excited when I found out that they were wintering here, like they're from the Arctic, and then in the winter they come here. Like this is their version of going south, and I was like, oh, right. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, you went south in the backyard. Like it's like starstruck.
That's one of my mom's favorite birds. One of the colloquial names in the US is snowbird, because they have like a dark, stormy top and a snowy white belly.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, I love those birds.
I know, Greg, that one of your other passions is promoting a really diverse range of voices in STEM and in climate. What motivates you there?
Yeah, that's like, it's so interesting. There's like a whole other talk to talk about the culture of YouTube, but being on YouTube is really interesting because it's actually like, I mean, there's a lot of studies about it. It's called a manosphere. A lot more, there's a certain type of people that really engage with YouTube, and they're not as progressive as you'd think. And then there's this interesting challenge within the science community that it's a huge cultural issue, but it's really pitched to men, to white men. There's algorithms built that our audience is predominantly white men, and that the energy that they have towards us for being queer, it's a very homophobic space. It's a very misogynist space. So the fact that we put our science information out on YouTube, we get so much insight into these like really sort of intense, dark parts about science that a lot of people don't understand. When they think science, they think progressive, like ideals, but it's really not. In fact, it's like even more challenging of a space to sort of like just even be openly queer with like an effeminate voice in. So that's been like that's what the real energy was for us. And then through that, we've learned so much about how like problematic science is in so many ways, how like white supremacy was really birthed in tandem with science. Like there's all these fascinating things that we are like, okay, we love science and we understand science enough that we want to talk about its issues. So there's like, it's a really interesting tension of like, we need to make sure that there's like the general public understands that science is like, is this incredible thing and is like probably the only thing that's going to save our human lives from a pandemic. But there are these flaws, and like, how can we have this conversation? Because the flaws are often ignored, and they're ignored within our community on YouTube. No one wants to get political. No one wants to talk about these things. So we're just the type of people who are just like, we want to talk about this. And then on YouTube, you really sort of see the challenges, and it's exciting for us to just like be a part of it and to be that challenge. But I'd say the impetus came from the fact that we're on YouTube and it's just like a bunch of ignorant white men yelling at us all the time. And we're like, what is this? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important to acknowledge too with science at large, and also with like the environmental fields. They all overlap, and it's complicated to say the least.
Yeah, I'm writing a video literally before I went on this about nuclear energy. And it's like, what an interesting dissection of the environmental movement, kind of like crumbling. Right-wing people will take some like talking points of like someone in the environment. Like it's like nuclear energy is a really interesting place. And as I do the research, I'm like, oh my God, like we all need to figure out how to get on the same side of this.
Yeah. And so we talked about your YouTube following. There's a lot of people around the world who obviously look up to you and Mitch. If there's one piece of advice that you can give to someone who's like an aspiring science communicator, do you have anything that you'd say to them?
Science communicator, yeah. Well, we always say this annoying thing where like Nike got it right, like just do it, because there's a lack of science communicators, and we are now seeing this sort of like new crop finally kind of come out of TikTok, and these like, honestly, like we just look around and we're like, it's the same ones on YouTube. It's like us, Veritasium, like you can name them. And then I'm like, where's the other people coming in? And they're sort of slowly coming in now, but we need more voices. We need more people. Like there's no competition here. We're like, please just help us. I feel like in a lot of other spaces, it's kind of like, well, this is what you should do. There's right and there's wrong, but it's like, honestly, the more people, the better. And you're only going to really learn what works for you by doing it. So we're like, honestly, just start. Like no one's going to judge you, especially if you're just trying to teach people science. I'm like, why aren't more people doing this? And it works. It's like the only reason our YouTube channel is still popular, as we've seen so many of our peers come and go, is because we're talking about science, which is something that never goes out of style. It's constantly evolving. Like who knew that we were about to be in a pandemic? Like, it's like, you know,
A lot of material for you there.
Yeah, like that content's gonna do well. People want to know what the hell's going on. So yeah.
What's one of your favorite videos you've made?
I mean, just seeing that end of the Arctic one was, that was the one that we saw the clip from. That was probably one of my favorite ones. It was essentially in Canada, which everyone thinks is this amazing country, which is like, we have our issues. The National Energy Board was going to seismic blast in Arctic waters in the north. And so that's when you shoot these really loud sound waves down underneath the water to see if oil is underneath the ground in the Arctic. And they were going to do this on indigenous water and in Inuit waters. And so this Inuit community of Clyde River was suing the National Energy Board. So we went to go meet with them and explain what was going on, and essentially like with Emma Thompson, like bring voice to this. And it went to the Supreme Court, and then the Canadian government lost to them. So it was just like a video that was meant to bring awareness, and it did. And we like went to the protest and it worked. So that was definitely like a good one. And now they can't seismic blast there, which is just like, okay, sweet, that one worked. Whereas, you know, sometimes the videos don't help the way we want them to.
Well, thanks for that successful advocacy. One of our viewers named Cindy says, don't change and don't ever stop spreading the love. Thank you,
That's
Cindy.
so sweet. Aw, thanks.
Yeah, that's great. So one final question about birds. It's whether you have a favorite bird, and I've heard a rumor that if you do, it might be a pigeon.
Yeah, we did the. Yeah, like I just thought it was so funny when I found out they were called rock doves. I'm like, they're doves. And so now, yeah, I just like have some ongoing jokes, like normalize calling pigeons rock doves. And I do think, and I don't know enough, but it's like, did you know pigeons are actually doves? Okay, they are doves, right? This is just like from me like doing my birding research. But I think I saw mourning doves, a pair of them recently, and I couldn't figure it out because they were like in trees and they were being so inconspicuous. And like, but then I'm like, I just couldn't tell the difference between a pigeon and just like seeing like a mourning dove and then being like, why am I so obsessed with seeing that? And like, then there's all these other, like these beautiful doves over here. And so, yeah, I love all birds. And so I love rock doves as well.
Well
great.
said. So do I, especially as a resident of New York. I see them all the time and I appreciate them. So thank you so much, Greg. We're gonna be dropping the links that we talked about to some of your YouTube videos and channel in the comments, as well as an article about pigeons, your favorite bird.
Thank you. That's so awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, it really means a lot. And I will continue to bird and continue to talk about how obsessed I am with birds till I die.
Thanks for all you do. Let's do it again.
Okay, I would love to.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye. So for our next segment, we are very excited to welcome on Allison Keyes, who is an award-winning journalist with more than 25 years of experience. She is currently a correspondent for CBS News Radio, as well as a contributing writer for Smithsonian Magazine. Keyes has worked for a variety of outlets, including ABC News and NPR, and she's also the host of CBS News Weekend Roundup podcast, which we'll drop a link to in the comments so our viewers can take a listen later. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
Hey,
And I have to say, I also see birds. I see birds everywhere, everywhere. I live in Washington, D.C. along a waterway, not right off the channel of the Potomac and near the tidal basin. So there are flocks of seagulls, and no, bird people, I don't know what kind. I know that they're different kinds, but they're flocks of seagulls all of the time, wheeling through the air. And then there are those blue jays that always have so much to say, like they're yelling at their kids, you know?
They are very chatty.
Yes, they are.
Well, I love that you're seeing birds. And yeah, let's get into our first question. So while most people are aware of Harriet Tubman's work on the Underground Railroad, you wrote a piece for Audubon.org last year exploring her prowess as a naturalist that not that many people might know about. So could you share some of the ways that she used her knowledge of natural history during both her Underground Railroad days as well as later while serving in the Union Army?
Well, one of the coolest things I found out in researching this piece is that Harriet Tubman used owl calls as a signal on the Underground Railroad. It was the barred owl, sometimes known as the hoot owl, you know, and I'm not going to do it well, but they sound something like, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? You know, and the reason that she used that as she was traveling with freedom seekers and her family and the people that she was bringing from Maryland through Pennsylvania to New York and all the way to Canada, she traveled at night. So you needed a way to let people know, okay, you can come out of hiding and you can keep walking with us now. So she used the calls of the owl because it was a natural sound that you would hear. You couldn't, you know, roar like a lion or something because there are no lions in Dorchester, Maryland, but they're definitely hoot owls. So that was one of the ways she was able to keep in touch with the people that she was shepherding through these days-long trips that were truly terrifying. And the other thing that kind of blows my mind is I don't really know anybody from the city that if you drop them into the middle of a forest or into the middle of a wetland or a stream or something, they'd know how to navigate that at all. And she started learning this kind of thing when she was a child. By the age of 7, she was working to trap muskrats, which you do barefoot, apparently. And it was another skill that she learned later in life that when she started helping people to become free, she was able to use that. She used astronomy. She was able to help people find plants that they needed to eat or to help keep a baby quiet or to heal wounds. And most importantly, she learned all the way from the time she was a child how to navigate through places safely so that the people that she was trying to help be free didn't get caught.
Wow, that's amazing. Just like how she was an expert on so many different things. And I think personally that was a very good imitation of a barred owl. We can actually play a call right now so we can hear from the owl itself.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
I understand they also have like kind of a siren call and a whale, but I'm not going to try either one of those.
Oh, come on. Allison, this is really great. Thank you. So how did you approach the research into the story on Harriet Tubman when you were writing for Audubon? And what did you find that surprised you along the way?
Well, frankly, a lot of that surprised me because, almost everyone knows about her work with the Underground Railroad. Everyone knows that she was a scout and a spy and a nurse for the Union Army during the Civil War, and she was a suffragette later in life. But I had no idea, or I guess I hadn't really thought of how much of nature you would have to learn how to deal with, right? If you are going through days of taking people hundreds of miles in some cases, and people who aren't used to traveling with you. So I started out by calling the Smithsonian, right? The National Museum of African American History and Culture, because I figured somebody there would know. And they actually hooked me up with Yola Dance, who used to be with the Network to Freedom program for the National Park Services. And Audubon magazine introduced me to Ranger Angela Crenshaw, who's at the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park in Maryland, who was the person that was talking to me about the birds. And she said, when you're traveling at night and trying to be silent and not to be seen, the last thing you want to do is have sounds that cause people to stick their head out of their cabins and go, okay, what's going on over there? Or to start dogs barking. So you do your level best to sound like the night, just like you've seen in all of those movies, right? And the also interesting thing was she had to be an astronomer as well, because it's not like people had maps, that she's carrying around with her. So she knew the neighborhood, she knew where the farms were, she knew where the plantations were. She knew the routes that she took all of the time, but she also had to look up into the sky and go, oh, okay, here's the Big Dipper and Little Dipper, because that's one of the things that you use when you're trying to go north. So she's an astronomer as well, So the level of expertise she had in all of that is just really amazing. And I still think it's something that should be taught in schools now, because so many people, as I said, if you drop them into the middle of a field 50 miles from a city, they wouldn't be able to get out.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we have a viewer question. Brianna wants to know, in your research, did you find how folks know the difference between her owl call and an actual call from an owl? That's a good question.
I did not find that out, actually. I was lucky enough to have the naturalist, Angela Crenshaw, the forest ranger, who does a much better barred owl call than I do, imitated it for me. Then I looked it up. But I get the impression from my research that she was so used to nature. She was so used to transversing. Here's my word. She's so used to having to get where she needed to go, and her ears would hear what the owls sound like. So I think from someone who's been out there like that since they were a child, they would be able to, redo it and sound like a real person. I mean, you have a cat, right? So you could do some plausible meow for your cat. And especially if your life depends on it and the lives of those that you are trying to bring out of slavery depend upon it, better believe you're going to be able to do a good barred owl. Plus, it was an owl that was very common in that area and still is. So it's something that she heard every day. It's not like it's a strange sound to her. So she knows what the woods sound like. She worked in timber fields, so she knows what all of that sounds like. She knows what the wind sounds like through the grass. And I'm not saying that she did that, but my point is she was comfortable in nature from the time that she was a child. So it made it possible for her to become one with it in a way that I think a lot of people now don't know how to do.
Well, our viewer Pamela says this is incredible research, amazing, inspiring, and wants to thank you, Allison. Which is
absolutely.
Allison, were there any tidbits you uncovered in your research that didn't make it into the final piece that you'd like to share?
I have a personal Harriet Tubman story, but I actually also want to talk about the things that she did as a botanist, right? Because as we said, she was a nurse. You're not carrying around a medical kit. So she had to know what plants could be used to heal what plants could stop bleeding. And you also have to look for plants for food, of course. So tomatoes and okra and that kind of thing. And animals and traps, which she knew how to kill and prepare. So she was able to keep people fed. She was able to keep them calm in some ways, although, of course, there are the stories of the people that wanted to flee. And she basically threatened them. You can't leave us now because that's not happening. But her knowledge of humanity and nature is what made her such an amazing person. I've been inspired by her since I was a little kid, because who could do all of that? Especially at a time now where people are learning one discipline, maybe, or maybe two. But basically, she learned the language of the planet, along with the language of having to navigate through the horrific, deadly things that she had to get through. I mean, if she got caught by a slaver, if the people with her got caught by a slaver, she was going to be dead. So I look at her and think, wow, from somebody who learned that who has been sent out to work on plantations since the time she was 5, to become who she became has been such an inspiration for so many kids. I don't know almost any kid that doesn't know the basic who Harriet Tubman was. And I'm not even talking about the movie that came out recently.
Yeah, she's such an iconic and powerful figure in history, and that's even an understatement. So we have a viewer, Bobby, who says that this conversation will be part of their first grade conversation tomorrow. So lots of teachers in the audience. That's awesome.
That is great. I am a daughter of a teacher, so she will be pleased to hear that. Oh, we're out of time. See, I wasn't looking at the clock for a change.
It flew by.
I know, right?
Maybe a little. Well, thank you so
thanks for
much,
having
Allison,
me.
for joining us. A lot of viewers are commenting how much they enjoyed this, and we're going to drop a link again in the comments to your story on Harriet Tubman and to your podcast so that viewers can check you out as you break down the news.
Thank you so much, and have a great one. And we see birds.
Yes, they're everywhere. Thanks, Allison.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. So last month, we debuted our Birding 101 segment, and it was actually so popular with our viewers that we've decided to turn it into a recurring series. So we've invited Keith Russell, who's the program manager for urban conservation for Audubon Mid-Atlantic, to join us for a conversation about birding by ear. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Welcome, Keith.
Thanks. It's great
Glad to have you. So what's a day in the life of an urban conservation manager?
Well, I basically focus on issues that affect birds in urban places in the built environment, especially threats from glass and artificial lights at night, which, as many of you know, can cause birds to collide with buildings, and threats from non-native plants, which can negatively impact our native insect populations. And addressing these threats is, of course, a main focus of Audubon's Bird-Friendly Communities program. So they're very important. But the work also addresses other things that can harm birds, including habitat loss, feral cats, pesticides, herbicides, water pollution, habitat management, and some other things. And overall, we use a variety of strategies to try to address these issues, including education, monitoring, research. We do on-the-ground conservation, advocacy, and environmental justice. So we use a lot of different cards to try to move the dial on these issues in big cities.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for all the work that you're continuing to do. So we'll share a link to that video that we just showed and some articles that explore your work in the comments. So let's get started with this Birding by Ear 101. It's felt like a really long winter for a lot of us, I'm sure, but we're also starting to hear some birds vocalize as the spring season is closer. So one of the birds that really brought joy to me at the start of the pandemic was the American robin. I would just see them like forage on the ground when I went to a park. And it was just like a nice little sight to see when you go outside. So for viewers who might just be getting into birds, how can they tell if it's a robin rocking outside their window? Keith, what do you think?
So I'm so glad that Allison talked about, Harriet Tubman identifying those or calling those barred owls, because that's a really important way that some of us learn bird songs. What she said about the barred owl call was, "Who cooks for you?" So that's what we call a mnemonic. It's just a catchy phrase that sounds just like what the bird is doing. That's a very helpful thing for learning certain bird calls, but there are other birds that you don't have a good mnemonic for. And I think the robin is really in that category. So if I were to describe a robin to someone, I would generally say it's a series of short melodic sort of phrases that are separated by, about half a second. But if you describe that to someone, that could also be a description of some other bird songs, like the rose-breasted grosbeak or the black-headed grosbeak, or maybe the red-eyed vireo. So when you try to learn birds like this that have songs that are like other birds, one of the things that helps you is the fact that in this case, the robin is a very common widespread bird. So you're going to run into it a lot of times. And every time you hear one and see one, you'll get that song reinforced in your mind. So I think the fact that robins are common gives us a chance to hear them a lot and look up and identify them. And each time that repetitive identification will help the song to stick in our minds. It really does take a lot of exposure to some of these songs, but the more songs we learn, the more we know. So it becomes easier to identify things that we might not know or not be familiar with, but because robins are so common, they give us a lot of chance to practice.
Yeah, and let's listen to a robin song right now.
Yeah, we hear these songs so often, but they're just absolutely beautiful. And it's one of the gifts that birds give to us is their songs. I think it just does something visceral to us and gives us a sense of peace and joy, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's such a sweet melody. Ugh, brings joy to my ears. So we have a viewer named Rebecca who just said, I saw 4 robins in the schoolyard in East Harlem today. I was so thrilled. That's awesome, Rebecca. Like 4 robins in a row. So many people love robins, and many folks are saying that the sound reminds them of spring. I agree. So for our viewers, all the way from Texas up to the Pacific Northwest, you might start to hear a song like this any day now. So let's play this next song that we have queued up and see if a few viewers can guess what it is. I'm seeing a lot of comments. Keep them coming. So, David, where would you start with identifying this bird?
Yes, a lot of people will hear a bird, especially now in the spring when they start to sing after the winter, and not know what it is right away. And as Keith said, seeing the bird, watching it vocalize is a really good way to learn and remember. But sometimes you can't see the bird right away. And this bird that we just played is one of those that's often very hard to see. So one of the things I always try to do when I'm trying to identify an unfamiliar bird song is first pay attention to where the bird is. Is it high up in the tree? Is it low down against the ground? If you were hearing this bird in your yard or the park, it would sound like it was coming from pretty low toward the ground in a dense, tangly area. And so that might help you start to figure out, okay, what kind of bird might I be dealing with? And in fact, I think we have some viewers who got this right. I saw them go flying by on the screen. It's a Buick's wren, and we'll pull up a picture here. Beautiful little bird, gray on the belly, brown with a white eye stripe. Similar look to the Carolina wren in the east, which has a much buffier belly and a very different song. But the Buick's wren has that initial kind of scratchy note and then a long, beautiful trill. And so they're a bird that starts to sing pretty early in the spring across a big part of the western United States, as Christine said. So, when you start to hear this song, now you'll know it's a Buick's wren. If you hear another bird that's unfamiliar, just start trying to narrow down where is it coming from in the vegetation. What birds have I seen at my feeder? Is it maybe one of those? And that's where the Audubon app is a really great tool. So a lot of birds are starting to sing now. They've been quiet all winter, but you've seen them coming to your feeders. You've seen them at your yard. So if you pull up the Audubon app and put in some of the common birds that you know are in your yard, you can listen to their songs and say, oh, I've been seeing a Buick's wren coming to my feeder all winter. Now I know what it sounds like.
Yeah, I actually just used the Audubon app today. Not that I'm biased or anything, but it's super helpful. All right, so let's listen to another song. This is a cheerful bird song for the official bird of 7 whole United States. Wow, Keith, what do you think that was?
Well, it sounds like a northern cardinal. which is a bird that's really widespread. And most of us, even if we're not birders, have probably seen it or are familiar with it. But what we heard was just one of the songs that's made by the Cardinal. And it does a bunch of different songs. Again, trying to characterize them is a little challenging. I think in general, all of their songs are melodic. They're not particularly high in pitch, they're not particularly low in pitch. But when I hear Cardinals, I usually listen and expect to hear a bunch of phrases given in rapid succession. And sometimes they'll just do one phrase over and over and over and over again. Sometimes they'll follow that by another phrase. So they'll do one phrase over and over again and then another phrase over and over again. And that creates impression in your mind that I think you can remember. And once you've heard that and you've heard it a number of times, you begin to just sort of have a feeling for that's a Cardinal, because I know that pattern. And even though they're doing a bunch of different things, I hear one phrase repeated and one phrase repeated, and they're just sort of the same thing over and over again. So that's a bird, again, it's very common and we get to hear it lots of times. The more times we hear it and see it, the more will be reinforced in our minds that we're hearing a Cardinal. And they also give a really characteristic call note, because we've been talking about songs, and functionally songs are different biologically than calls, and Cardinals give a very distinctive sort of peat call that is easy to remember once you're familiar with that. And it's great when you go out and you hear birds and you don't see them and you know exactly what you're hearing is probably, you know, a Cardinal or this or that. So, but this is one of those birds that all of us can get to learn its calls and songs pretty easily.
These are all really good tips, Keith. So we actually have some more Cardinal calls that we can listen to. So let's hear some of those. Yeah, those are like some of the phrases that you were talking about. So, oh, I don't know if we have more. So our viewer Robin, love the name by the way, asks, do the different calls mean different things? David, do you want to tackle this one?
Sure, and Keith will get you in here too. You know, birds do have different calls and songs for different purposes, and Keith was getting into that a little bit. So those long, more complex sounds that we call songs are often used to broadcast territory. So that can be against a competitor. Hey, this is my space, stay out. Can also be to attract a mate. Hey, look at this great turf I've carved out, and look at how ready to go I am, right? So it's a great way for the birds to say, this is my space. And if you're a competitor, stay away. If you're a prospective mate, come check it and me out. But one of the things that's really interesting is that we've learned a lot more in the last few years about how much female birds actually sing, as well as the male birds, which is what people often think of. And Keith, Northern Cardinal is one of the birds where the female actually sings quite a bit. And I'd imagine you've witnessed that around Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's very true. And I think sometimes we have ideas about what goes on in nature, but we selectively see what we want to see. But in actuality, we, as you were saying, in recent years, we've started to open our eyes to the fact that there's a lot more singing going on among female birds. So I think it's wonderful to point out that there are many things that we still don't know about the natural world. And each one of us is in a position to see something perhaps that is unique or that somebody hasn't paid attention to enough. So I just want to encourage everyone to anoint yourselves naturalists and use your skills of identification to just see what's going on, because you might see something that's actually pretty interesting that someone else hasn't really looked at before.
That's so well said. One of the other things I love about bird vocalizations is that there are some calls that actually communicate across different species of birds. So if you have feeders, a bunch of different birds, finches, chickadees, titmice, you might have a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk fly through the yard. And when that happens, if you listen, you'll hear a high-pitched note from a bird and they all scatter. That's a universal signal for danger, and all the different species know what it means.
That's really interesting. I learned something new today.
It works.
It does. Well, Keith, in Philadelphia, I would imagine that you're hearing cardinals sing already. I always listen for them right around Groundhog Day, which is the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And that change in day length, even though February is so cold for so many parts of the country, the change in day length is what starts off those songs. And so you can start to hear cardinals in early February.
Yeah, it's still like right now, we got tons of snow on the ground and it's really cold and the cardinals are singing along with some other species. And it's always encouraging to me because it's like, okay, they know what time it is and they know what they have to do and they're doing it. And, I think, well, I should be the same way. Sometimes we get a little, oh, it's cold outside. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. And then I hear the birds singing and I say, okay, they can get up. I can get up. So they just go right on at their schedules. And, despite the fact that it's snowing or it's cold, they say, well, it's that time of year, as you said, the daylight's coming and we got to get ready.
That's very true. And spring is just around the corner. So Keith, I was wondering, a lot of viewers are asking if there's anything they can do to attract some of these birds to their yards for the incoming season. So do you have any tips for our viewers?
Well, birds are slowly learning to adapt to a lot of different things, a lot of changes in the environment that we're making, but they still need cover. They still need native plants. They still need water. And those are all things that we can provide for birds depending on where we are. That the details may be a little different in terms of the species, but we generally want to have cover for birds. Having a lot of tall trees and nothing in the understory does not attract as many species as if we had some shrubs and some other types of low growing plants. And we want to have some water if we can. And we want to really dominate our yards with native species of plants, if possible, because they benefit our native insect populations, and that's what a lot of birds are going to use. And then there's other dynamics between native birds and native plants that are a little bit more complicated, but I think those are some of the things that we want to do. And then I guess I would just mention one thing additionally, that we want to also be sensitive to the problems of having birds fly into our windows of our house. And there are products that we can put on these windows to alert them that there's a window there and to try to keep them from doing it. We don't want to attract them to our yards and then have them all crashing into our windows.
Yeah, those are all really good tips, Keith. So thank you. We've had a few articles that touch on those tips as well, if you want to go into more detail. So speaking of yards, I've noticed a bird a lot when I was in Dallas, and that was a northern mockingbird in my backyard. So I feel like this is a trick question, but David, how can you tell if that's a mockingbird you're hearing? Like, where would you even begin if this bird is like a mimic?
I think this is the bird I get the most questions about every spring. Yeah, so as their name indicates, mockingbirds can mimic a huge range of other bird songs. I remember during the pandemic last spring watching a mockingbird in the Hudson River Park near where I lived in Manhattan. And I was just making a list of all the different birds that it was mimicking in its song. Barn swallows and phoebes and starlings and cardinals and Carolina wrens. And the list was, I think, 20 species long, just amazing. But here's the thing that I always listen for when I'm trying to figure out if I'm hearing the actual bird or a mockingbird imitating it, because imitations can be flawless. But what the mockingbird will do is it'll mimic a particular bird 3 or 4 times, and then it moves on to the next one. So you end up with this long, minutes or even hours long, sometimes string of 3 or 4 imitations of a cardinal song, 3 or 4 imitations of a phoebe call, 3 or 4 imitations of a Carolina wren. So it'll do it a few times, but it's always changing, always moving on to the next song. The other thing that I think gets a lot of attention to mockingbirds from people is that they will sing all night long. And those tend to be male birds that are advertising to attract a mate. And so people will hear them at 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's one of the other reasons that there's so much curiosity about what is this bird singing outside my window all night long.
They're just always there to remind you that they're there. So
Right.
you mentioned a few of those sounds. Let's hear some of them right now. Such a range. Also, a few of our, oh, there's more.
Just amazing. I mean, a wood thrush in there even, which is one of the most complex and beautiful songs in North America, and the mockingbird can just do it all.
Yeah, and a few of our viewers have shared that they've heard mockingbirds mimic a car alarm. I believe
yeah. Yeah, mockingbirds can learn to imitate sounds that they hear around people as well. Things like car alarms, cell phones. They're able to pick up all of that and mimic them back flawlessly.
Yeah, that's amazing. So several of our viewers want to know if the same species of bird might have a different accent or a different dialect depending on where they can be found. Keith, do you know the answer to this?
That definitely is the case. Birds are kind of like humans. And in different parts of the country, we can have different dialects or accents, and birds can also do the same. So they also can appear slightly different within one species. If you go to one part of its geographic range, the birds of that species may look a particular way that's a little different than the birds in other areas, which is again, kind of like us as people. So yeah, birds definitely can have different vocal qualities and songs and ways of communicating vocally in different parts of their range.
Mm-hmm. It's so cool. So let's move on to another bird that a lot of our viewers might be familiar with. So we're going to do that thing where we listen to it and the viewers feel free to comment what you think it is. A lot of comments coming in already. Keith, do you want to tell us what it is?
Well, I'm sure a lot of you do know that's a mourning dove, mourning, versus morning. And it's a bird that sounds like it's in mourning. And, you know, once you've heard that cooing that's in that particular pattern, it's pretty easy to remember. It's interesting, some people that are not into birding hear that and they think they're hearing an owl, especially because mourning doves often sing very early in the morning, and they're convinced they have an owl hooting or something like that. But that hoo is a very distinctive sound that the mourning doves makes. And I don't know of any other birds that sound like that, really. There are no owls that really do. There may be some doves, maybe in the South, that have similar coos. I'm not familiar with all the vocalizations of the doves in Florida. Some of them are not native. So there may be other things that you could confuse it with in those areas. But the mourning dove also has, I think it's the only bird we've talked about so far that makes a distinctive sound with its feathers. When they fly, their wings make a really high-pitched whistling sound. And so that's another way that you can identify mourning doves. You might hear that and not even see the bird, but it does make a distinctive sound with its feathers when it flies.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that a lot of people confuse the mourning dove with an owl, because I would like to say my first time I technically ever went birding was when I was in middle school, and I went on a whole like nighttime hunt for this owl that ended up being a mourning dove. But it was a cool intro to birding.
Yeah, it is.
Let's listen to that flight call that you mentioned. Such
It's a cool sound.
Yeah. So someone from Facebook, Cassandra, wants to know, what's the point of imitating other songs, and why did the Mockingbird develop this skill? Keith, do you want to tackle this one?
Well, there are many birds that do that. The mockingbird's in a family of birds that includes the catbird and the thrashers, and imitating other bird songs are part of what all of those species do. They don't do that as accurately as a mockingbird, but there are many other birds in other parts of the world that also imitate other birds' songs. And one of the most famous is the lyrebird in Australia, which can imitate unbelievably well mechanical sounds as well as the sounds of other birds. Why that is, I'm not sure if that question can be answered in the way that the person who asked it would like to have it answered. It's a way of distinguishing themselves perhaps from other species. Simply having a series of sounds that are appropriated from other species, but all given in succession, is a distinctive way of communicating. And once we get to know those birds and what characterizes their songs, we can identify them. So it's their way of distinguishing themselves from other species in a clever way. I'm not sure if there's a deeper way to interpret what they're doing, if there is some sort of effect that this has on the behavior of other species around them. But that's just something that I don't know enough about to really be able to answer that question. But certainly the pattern of imitating all these other species gives them a distinctive communication style, which identifies who they are and what they are.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool fact. So thank you so much, Keith. We've gotten so many questions, and I wish we had time to answer them all. Our viewers love this segment and all the other segments today, and so did I, of course.
Yeah, it's been great being here. And I know there were some questions about how to prevent bird window collisions. And I would say real quickly, if you Google that, hopefully you'll come up with some of the products that are available on the market. But generally, you'd like to put some sort of a visual barrier on your windows. And that can be in the form of a series of dots, a series of stripes. You can even hang cords every 4 inches in front of your windows with simple ropes or cords that you have at home. But the more you look, the more you will find. We certainly have some information on our website, Audubon, and there's a world of information out there about products that you can buy, and they're not too expensive.
Good stuff. And we're dropping a link into the comments for our viewers who want to click directly through. Great stuff. Thank you, Keith. So as always, we'd like to close the show with something that all of our viewers can do right now to help birds. And today's request is actually very timely. There's a Monday deadline on this ask, so we hope that you'll take action today. We've been keeping you updated over the last few months on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is a century-old law that protects more than 1,000 species of birds from avoidable hazards in the environment. So that law has been under heavy attack for the last 5 years, but thousands of you have taken action to help save it. And so just this month, the US Fish and Wildlife Service hit pause on a terrible effort to roll back the protections that that law provides for birds. Great news, obviously, and it's thanks to all of you and your advocacy. So part of this pause means that the Fish and Wildlife Service is accepting additional public comments right now on the future of this law and what to do about our birds. And we've got a form that you can go fill out to express your point of view. We've got an image of what it looks like here on the screen. We'll just scroll through. You can see, you just fill out your information. There's a pre-written message that you can customize, of course, but it has all the information. If you've spoken up before on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, thank you. You've gotten us to this point. But this is a new step. This is a new process. So even if you've spoken out before, go to this link, audubon.org/MBTA. That's MBTA for Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We'll drop a link in the comments. And you have until Monday, March 1st, to make your comments on the future of this very important law for birds. Again, this is a new process. Thank you for your advocacy in the past. This is about getting it over the finish line. Comments are due on Monday, so we hope you'll visit audubon.org/MBTA today and make sure that your voice is heard as part of this process. Thanks so much to our guests today, Greg Brown and Allison Keyes and Keith Russell. We also want to thank everybody who's saying right now that you've sent your message to support the MBTA. We'll see you next month for another great show. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all. See you next month.